Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Quiet Life Podcast. My name is Joe Valley. I am your host, and our guest today is Deanna Berardi on the team here at Quiet Life, doing a deal debrief on an 8-figure deal that was a heck of a business. Let me put it that way. What we talk about in this particular podcast is the fact that, number one, the person that referred the business over to us is a podcast listener. So thank you very much. This particular individual did earn a referral fee. The seller was not in our system. We had not had conversations with them before. They eventually became a podcast listener as well, and then was referred over by the individual that is a listener. And the referral fee on this one was substantial because it was an 8-figure deal. I would imagine that the total amount would pay for almost 4 years of a state school, at least here in North Carolina. I'm not sure what the other states cost. The business itself, again, 8 figures, a very, very defensible business, very attractive business. And the short story is that the the advisor recently sold a business that was similar to it and went out to that buyer first, because that's what seemed like the best approach. And the seller was all up for it. Instead of going through the whole process with lots of different potential buyers, they wanted to go to one and see what their feedback would be. Turned out to be very interesting feedback that was very different from the rest of the list. That sort of tells you the end result is that that particular buyer didn't work out, and we ended up going to the rest of the list. Deanna breaks it down in great detail. Lots of lessons here. Let's jump to it. It's a deal brief with Deanna, who, by the way, does run the referral program. So you can reach out to her at any time as well. Here we go. Deanna Berardi, welcome back to the Quiet Life Podcast.
Hey, Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to hear another deal debrief from you. And this one is a big one too, 8-figure listing. So let's jump right into it. Tell me about this one.
So this was such a cool story. First of all, I like how the seller found Quiet Light. And the reason that happened is because the seller has a family member and her husband, and they were avid podcast listeners to Quiet Light. So on a regular basis, they're listening to this podcast, listening to you, Joe. And this listener, went to her dad and said, yo, you should look at them and talk to them. And you're 58. I know you eventually want to retire in 2 years. Start listening, tune in to this podcast, and maybe you should even talk to them now, because all they talk about is how to exit and how to plan for your exit and be ready before you think you need to be ready. So it was a referral that arrived on our desk. And that's how they found us, which is pretty cool from a listener.
That's good. I'm glad I'm not making people want to work with our competitors by talking the way I talk on the podcast. So I'm helping. I'm not hurting. That's good. Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. So can you tell us a little bit about the business itself?
Yeah. So then what ended up happening is, so the business arrived on the desk of one of our advisors, and it is a business that's in the camping niche. And they had founded themselves in 2006. It was by a Canadian. So it was a Canadian seller. And they were using Ecommerce. They had no presence at all on Amazon. And they had these camping accessory type products. And they were very sizable. I mean, they had like over 3 million in gross revenue. In that gross revenue, 2.5 million were in gross profit. So they had an insanely good margin. Like their SDE margin was 68%, and they had amazing growth.
This is
their
for
TTM
a physical
growth.
Product?
This is for a physical product. Yes.
And 3 million in revenue. Is that what you said? Annual revenue?
3 million in gross revenue annual.
That's
and then
stunning.
2.5 million in gross profit. I know, it's stunning. And I mean, this is a 68% SDE margin. And this becomes important later on in the story about these fantastic numbers and the weight they carried.
So typically, folks, they are the SDE as a percentage of revenue for a physical products business is generally in the 10 to 20% range. And when you get down less than 5%, you as buyers go, wait a minute, the margins are a little tight here. I can't pay that kind of multiple that you want. So as business owners, if you're out there running a physical products e-commerce business, 10 to 20% is typically what we see. In this case, 68%, just phenomenal. It's amazing.
It is. It's phenomenal. And not only that, with the numbers strong and amazing, but it was a very defensible product. Their defensibility was very, very strong. They had 7 utility patents, and all these patents were around this mold that was used to make these little devices that were super relevant to campers, that made their camping experience more secure, protect their products that they were using camping. So it was a very specific little utility patent that was created. There were 7 of them. They also had 2 trademarks. So they were in a hot niche with camping that had a great run up in the pandemic. They also were highly profitable. They were large. They had great defensibility, and they also were very sticky. They had like 42,000 subscribers that were subscribed to their base. They were buying these products over and over again.
So the product was disposable in some sort, or it wore out, so they had to get a new one on a regular basis, or they just kept buying different variations of it?
Yeah, you could buy different variations of it. You would use it on different parts of your equipment. You might replace that equipment frequently, so you would use these again for that new piece of equipment. You would actually fall in love with the equipment, decide to use it on other types of equipment, like maybe just not your camping equipment, but your RV or your boat or something like that. In addition to this product, Joe, it also had really good search. So it was had a good name. Again, we on these debriefs, we keep all of this privacy for the client, but they had a really good name. And they also did very well in organic search, like almost 68% of their traffic was from organic search.
Okay. So they weren't spending a whole lot of money on advertising then. And this is not an Amazon FBA business. Most of the revenue is coming from straight up e-commerce off Amazon. Is that right?
100% of it. In fact, they had no presence at all on Amazon, which is what made them so desirable to some of the key buyers that ended up looking at them. Because they wanted to grow into that channel. Yeah.
Yeah. So how old was the business when our advisor took a look at it and was going to list the business for sale? Any idea on that? Because that goes into the value as well. Yeah.
So the business sold in 2022 and it started in 2006.
Okay. So it's well aged. And you said, and you said the person that referred him over said to the owner, you're 58 years old, you're old, you're going to have to retire at some point, which just crushes me because I just turned 57. So thanks a lot, whoever you are, referring partner. If you're listening now, 58 is not old. All right. So it's a well-aged business. Gosh, the patents, I mean, everything sounds great. Very, very defensible. Yes. One thing I want to ask about is the growth. You said that it really took off even further in the pandemic. Well, what happened in 2021 and 2022? Were the trends still climbing up or do they come down? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, the trends were still very good. The trends were still doing very, very good. They had a nice little spike in 2020, but they still kind of held it out. They kind of held at that level in 2021. So their trends were very good still.
What a lot of people are starting to look at, including us at Quiet Light, is whatever our trend's been from 18, 19, 20, and then 21 in our case was a big spike because of the M&A world really took off in M&A. Is the best year in history, and then 2022. And it's, is it still upward over that period of time? And maybe there's one big spike in there from 2021, or in the pandemic's case, perhaps 2020. Okay. So this sounds like a great business, a great listing, referred from the podcast listeners. So they're getting an education before they decide to get the valuation. Tell me about the valuation process and the advisor, and if there's any nuances there. Anything special or a good or bad that happened during that process?
Yeah. So when the advisor got their hands on this, they were obviously super excited. And here's the odd thing is that it just serendipitously landed with one of our advisors who had just sold a very, very similar business, similar in size, similar in niche, and similar in age to an aggregator. And they were like, oh my God, I can't believe that this is meant to be, because, I just found you found us through the podcast, and here we are. You are now back in my lap. I just ran the Quiet Light process with someone in a very similar niche. And this seller was super excited. They exited with an aggregator. What do you think about us just taking this deal because all these aggregators are obviously always asking for early deals, pre-deals, whatever.
Which we don't do for the most part,
get to be
folks.
first.
Which we don't
which
do.
we don't do. So they brought this aggregator and they just said, hey, what do you think? And this was all, of course, set up with the seller. It was kind of like, we're going to try this first and let's just get some early feedback and kind of see what they say. Now, the interesting thing is that the advisor said, because of the things we just talked about, the niche, defensibility, the profitability, the size, the stickiness of it, the fact that it was only in one channel, I'm going to put you at a 5X. So the advisor brought this to the aggregator at the sale price, which was 10.6 million plus inventory. That was the value for the client. And so, Joe, you tell me, what do you think the aggregator said when they saw this listing?
I know the answer.
Well, what do you think?
I think they said, we did a poor job managing all of our purchases, and our debt providers won't give us any money. How's that? Or this is not in the Amazon space. All we know is Amazon. This is in a organic area where we don't have to pay for advertising. It's more stable. It's more defensible. It's a great business, and we don't do that. No, I'm being so harsh on the aggregators right now. What did they say, Deanna?
Well, what they said, and remember, this was around
I just want everybody to know that Deanna's face, if you're listening, Deanna's like going, oh no, don't say those things, Joe, because Deanna works with so many of the aggregators in her buyer role, right? She does buyer support as well as runs the referral program. Let me just say, aggregators, the ones that I know you personally, I love you. I think you're awesome. I write about it in the book, how great you are. But with anything, right? So you are, and this is me speaking in general to the aggregators, and this is the way I want you sellers and buyers to think about them as well. They are well-educated. They are charming. They have a ton of dough. Odds are they're really good looking. They're incredibly likable. And all of those things are really, really positive, and combined together makes them really dangerous, because you just trust them and you want to sell to them, and you'll trust their opinion of what your business is worth and the deal structure you have to have and how they're going to run the business afterward and pay you an earn out and all these other things. Just be cautious about it. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. All right. Is that a good, grain of salt, Deanna? Because I know that we love the aggregators, and they only represent a small percentage of the overall business that we sell to. But for the most part, folks, they are good people, even though I do make fun at times. Sorry.
Yeah.
I had to correct my indiscretion there because Deanna was rolling her eyes at me.
Yeah. Well, in this case, remember, this aggregator has this deal, right? It's 10.6 million. It's a 5X multiple. It's in a niche that they're familiar with. And so everyone's like crossing fingers, like, okay, let's just get this done. Maybe we can just get this done. So the aggregator came back with something really, with basically a fear-based kind of message. They said, you know what? Things have changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 months since we closed that last deal. They had this fear-based, kind of dismal, almost doomsday type mentality. And they said, we are just not going to be able to respond to this. We're not going to be able to put this kind of money cash down. So essentially what they said is, we can kind of meet that number, right? We can go ahead and meet that price of 10.6 million plus inventory, but we're only going to give you half of that cash at closing. And the rest of that other half will be put into a seller's note that'd be payable like over 10 years. And that was just, pretty like a non-starter, right? For
That's
this
what
advisor.
My friend would call a dip. That's a dip, which means no, absolutely not. Business owners, entrepreneurs, we're not banks. We don't, finance things over 10 years, 12 to 36 months on the outside. I think, as I've said before, I think the longest that's ever happened was 60 months on a deal that I did. And it's because the buyer and seller just fell in love with each other. It was a couple of really successful female entrepreneurs. And when they met on the buyer seller conference call, it was like they were long lost sisters. And, the one selling was retiring, and she wanted to be paid over a longer period of time. But mostly it's 12 to 36 months. Well, part of the thing here with this, sometimes you just don't get the full truth. And it could be because the aggregator just couldn't muster up the funds, or because the other, businesses that they were managing were not performing the way they needed to. So the debt providers weren't giving them enough money to buy other things and reducing their risks in terms of the multiple of cash down. They changed their parameters. That could have been the case. I do want to comment before we go on to what happened afterwards, that the multiple on this one actually feels a little low, right? Because it's 14, 15 years old, 7 patents, growing in a really strong niche, so many positive things here. And at 5 times, it feels a tad low, but that's me from the outside looking in. Sometimes, folks, multiples are chosen based upon more than just the risk, growth, transferability, and documentation of the company. Sometimes it's chosen based upon the goals of the seller and how they feel in that moment in time. Sometimes it's just, look, I need to move on. Let's just see if we can get this listed, and get it done in the next 90 days. Sometimes that happens. And that might've been a little bit of the conversation going into this, or it's just priced to sell at this multiple, right? It's priced to sell, which be interesting to see what we ended up getting in terms of did it sell below asking, at asking, or above asking here. So let's jump onto this part, Deanna. The lesson here though is from the broker. He thought he had a buyer in hand, and what's the lesson here?
The lesson here is, well, here's the lesson, and the lesson really comes in the second and what happened next, essentially. So basically, the mental gymnastics, though, that I know the advisor went through, and to some part the seller was, well, geez, now we have someone telling me that they're facing a recession and that public traded companies in the same niche are only being valued at 3.5 multiples. This is a 5. E-commerce is not what it was. Maybe the sales are down in this niche because of the fact that the pandemic is over. People aren't in their camping gear as much, et cetera, et cetera. So all that kind of stuff gave a pause. And then the advisor kind of came back, fortified by the seller, and just said, you know what? No, flat no. That was one piece of feedback.
Well, I had the advisor doesn't tell the buyer making the offer no. I think what we do is I know what we do is we do present the offer to the seller, and then the seller said, what do you think? And that's when the advisor flat out said, heck no, right?
No, yeah. What I mean by when he said no is he said, this is just one data point of feedback. This is just a piece of feedback. No, we need to revisit this. If you're going to decline this offer, we can revisit this and go back to where we were before, which is know the value of this listing and say yes to the fact that we can present this to the market and go ahead and see what everybody else has to say. So at this point, the advisor and the seller just said, you know what, we didn't get this going. It wasn't a quick, easy thing. Let's go for the full-on launch. And so that's exactly what they did. They went ahead and they launched. And at this point, as you know, Joe, it's going in front of our buyer list. So this is pretty exciting because, we've got several thousand buyers that are seeing this listing for the first time. And that was when
they all have an NDA on file, folks. Just want to throw it out there. They all have an NDA. They don't see the details of the listing, right? We don't reveal the size of our list. It's much larger than several thousand, but they see the teaser in their inbox or on our website, and the teaser reveals nothing about the business. Should be nothing in the description that would allow you to determine what the name of the business is. They inquire on the business. They get a link to, if they don't have an NDA on file, when they inquire, our system is automated. It picks that up and gives them a link to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Once they've got the non-disclosure agreement signed off on, they'll get the full details in their inbox. So it's not thousands of people that see the full details of the listing. They see that it's a listing available, and then it's usually, you said hundreds, it's usually hundreds that would actually get to see the full details.
Yeah, when they decide to download and they like the teaser and download, they get the listing. So this one had a lot of interest, which is great. And essentially through our list, someone downloaded the package, emerged a repeat buyer. It was a private equity firm. The buyer was backed by private equity, and they had bought from Quiet Light before, and they saw this listing. And they got really excited about it. So they jumped in. There's a couple calls, buyers that percolated in that period. And in this particular case, this buyer closed on this deal at $7.65 million in cash. And then there was $3.5 million they put aside, and that other $3.1 million was going to be coming out and paid in 3 different earnout payments. So the first earnout payment would be 12 months after close. The second one would be 24 months after close, and then 36 months. And the thresholds that that had to be hit were very reasonable thresholds. And all these negotiations and all of this closed in less than 2 months. So, and the seller was very happy.
Less than 2 months for an 8-figure deal. That is impressive.
Less than 2 months.
That's less than our average of 89 days or whatever it might be at this point. I haven't looked at the deal dashboard this week. Certainly less than average. So 2 very well educated, very well financed buyers, and I'm sure they're good looking and charming too, had 2 completely different valuation opinions. They both had access to the same economic information and the same information about the business, but they made 2 completely different offers. Again, the first offer may have been presented because of their own personal situation. The second offer because they, looked at the details of it and their personal situation was a little bit better, a little bit more optimistic. I have a brother that has a saying that says it's rather crass, and this gives our podcast a rating that is explicit, right? And because I'm going to swear right now, but opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one, is what my brother says way too often. And in this case, you've got to keep that in mind, because if somebody tells you your business is not worth what you think it is, that's just their opinion, whether it's an advisor at Quiet Light or a buyer that approached you out of the blue. It's so important to get multiple opinions. We tell people, go get a valuation from someone else as well. If we're all in the same ballpark range, what you want to do is work with the one that you trust and like the most. If 5 out of the 6 are in one ballpark range and the other is, offering, saying they can sell for 50% more, you got to take that with a serious grain of salt, because odds are they're dead wrong. But that's why we recommend to most people, when we list a business for sale, we don't want to just go out to 1 or 2 or 3 buyers. We want it to go out to our entire list, because it brings people, with a bit of a frenzy, if you will, right? I think the average number of LOIs that we've had per listing over the last 12 months is 3.7 or something like that. And they sell on average above asking price. And in this case, Deanna, I know you broke down the details, which was about 70% cash and a 30% earnout over, lo and behold, right? 12, 24, and 36 months. So less than 36 months, as I said earlier on a note. Was it at, above, or below asking price that the business sold for?
It was at asking price.
It was at asking price. So it was priced right.
Yep.
And as far as the 30% earnout, folks, generally on a business of this size, when you get to 8 figures, you're going to have to carry some sort of note, and it's generally, we talk about 25, 30%. The form of that note is unknown. Oftentimes it's a seller note for the most part. So, you're getting a fixed amount every month. And in this case, it turned out to be an earnout, but it sounds like it's very reasonable benchmarks to hit. And it's just amazing to me still that this business closed within 2 months of it being listed for sale. For a deal of this size, whoever this buyer was, they've got to be incredibly well organized.
Yeah, they were apparently just amazing. The due diligence was they flew through due diligence, and they had great books. And like I said, they had all the presentation right up front of all the different patents they had. It was fairly easy to do the due diligence on the SEO because there really wasn't all that much there. They were very organic. What's cool is I touched base with the seller just a few months after this. And one of the things that he said 2 things. He said, number one is he was really happy with the Quiet Light platform. And what I take by that is almost to mean he was just really happy with the process. I think he was happy with the fact that he was able to trust the advisor's advice, as well as the Quiet Light, the reliability of the Quiet Light list, the buyer list that we have. So, he appreciated that he had this quick little pitch to someone, didn't work out. Okay, we're going to run the regular Quiet Light process and here's the result you're going to have. I think he had appreciation for how that was navigated in this scenario. And I think back, this is just my reflection, is what would have happened if this guy was happy, he had a great business, he's 58 years old, wasn't thinking about selling. What if he'd been approached by a buyer or an aggregator that got him on the hook and then had given him this blow of, well, you know what, we're going to have this seller note arrangement and things are dismal and you have to accept it. What if that had happened? Instead, because he had found Quiet Light, he had gotten to a broker that said, let's just talk about the rest of the world and what they think. Let's get this thing a real chance and run our process on it. And I think that was part of his happiness. And he ended up finding a retirement 2 years before he planned. And he said he was really happy. And what he also said is, you know what, I would definitely send more people your way so they can have a similar success. So
that's great.
Kind of cool,
we as entrepreneurs put our blood, sweat, tears, money, and lack of sleep many nights into our businesses. And sadly, the vast majority of people know what the value of their stock portfolio is, or their house or their car or their retirement fund, but they don't know what the value of their business is. And in this case, this person listened to the podcast and got a valuation for his business and then made his decision, which I think is the right way to do it. I don't like it when someone gets approached cold, never gave thought to selling, and go, okay, that number sounds interesting, because that number could be much higher, or the deal structure could be much better when they train for their exit, as we talk about, right? You just don't wake up and decide to sell your business. Train for your exit by listening to this and other podcasts like it, and by reading books, the Entrepreneur's Playbook, Walker's book, Buy Then Build. It's all educational material that will just enlighten you and give you more information to get the biggest return on your greatest asset, which very likely is your business. So I think this is a great deal debrief, Deanna. Thank you for sharing it. Folks, we're going to do this once a month and bring back deals every month. Deanna is the one that's working with the advisors, doing a debrief on every deal that's done every month. And we highlight one. In this case, it's this particular business because of the situation with going out to one buyer first and then coming back and getting full price by going to our list. As you may or may not recall, Deanna is also in charge of our referral program. If you have a friend in the business that has not been in touch with Quiet Light and they're thinking about getting a valuation for their business, send them to Deanna. Just send an email, introduction to referrals@quietlight.com. And she will talk to them. She'll make sure that they're assigned to a great advisor that will give them an honest and fair valuation for the business at zero cost. And if we eventually sell that business, whether it's right away within 2 months or in 12 or 24 months, you as the referring partner will end up getting a 10% referral fee sent to you. Surprisingly, probably Deanna will text you and go, hey, John, I owe you $10,000. Where do I send this? And it's a great text to get.
Oh, I love sending those texts.
Those are the favorite ones to send out. All right, folks, this is the end of the podcast. Thanks very much. Deanna, thanks for giving us this great deal debrief. We'll talk to you again next month.
Of course. Bye, Joe.